Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. We will now begin our data collection webinar today. I'm pleased to welcome you to the second webinar of the 2024 edition of the Data Collection Webinar Series, which is organized by the Data Collection Unit at UNICEF headquarters. I'm Attila Hancıoğlu. I'm the Chief of the Data Collection Unit and the Global Coordinator of the Multiple Indicator Cluster Surveys mix. This year, we are focusing on the mix program for this webinar series. We will have webinars on different aspects of mix implementation at country level, on new modules, on new tools and features. We will be holding these webinars about every 2 weeks on Wednesdays from 8 a.m. to 9:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, New York time. Today's webinar is entitled Introduction to IPUMS and the Harmonization of UNICEF Mix Microdata. Before we start, some housekeeping rules. We have scheduled today about 1 hour and 30 minutes, including Q&A, which will be possible towards the end of the session. Throughout the webinar, please remain muted. Kindly write your questions in the chat box or the Q&A afterwards when it is opened, and we will try and group them and direct them to the presenters during the Q&A segment at the end. We are recording this webinar, and it will be available on the UNICEF SharePoint site for UNICEF colleagues, together with the past webinars. But we will also be posting this to the Mix YouTube channel, so that this is publicly available alongside other webinars that we did previously. You can find the links to both of these, both the SharePoint site as well as the Mix YouTube channel, in the announcement that you received earlier. As I mentioned earlier, today's webinar is entitled Introduction to IPUMS and the Harmonization of UNICEF Mix Microdata. Before I give the floor to our presenters, let me say a few words. For several years now, we have been collaborating with the IPUMS team for the harmonization of all available mix microdata. This collaboration has been aiming at two main products. The Mix Tabulator is one of them, which is something that we are developing in UNICEF, which will be an online interface with the harmonized data at its backend, where users will be able to connect to Mix Tabulator and perform cross-tabulations, produce maps and graphs based on the harmonized data that IPUMS project has been developing for us. The second product of this collaboration is IPUMS Mix, the topic of today's webinar, which was recently launched, on which we will hear from our presenters. And our presenters are, and we are very happy to have them with us today, Elizabeth Boyle, who is a professor of sociology and law at University of Minnesota, and Anna Bolgrien, who is a research scientist and the project manager of IPUMS Mix. So without further ado, Liz, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Attila, and thanks everyone for being here today to talk about IPUMS Mix, which is a tool to easily harmonize and pool UNICEF mix data. Anna, can you move the, great. And Attila has already introduced us. I'm Elizabeth Boyle, professor of sociology. Anna is the project manager, and we also have Maher Munir with us, who's a research scientist who works on IPUMS Mix. I want to start by thanking a lot of individuals, especially the folks at UNICEF. This tool literally would not have been made without UNICEF's approval and provision of a gateway. And folks at UNICEF have been incredibly supportive. I want to especially thank Attila and Ivana Bielet, Yadigar Koskin, and the UNICEF mixed team, who have just provided all kinds of support for us. I also want to mention in the background, although we haven't dealt directly with the partner countries, want to acknowledge the difficult work they undertake to make these high quality surveys, which are so important for our research. And I also want to thank the survey respondents who spend their time and share their personal information so that we have a better understanding of what kind of experiences people are having around the world so that we can develop effective policies to improve lives, especially the lives of children. And I also want to thank the Eunice Kennedy Shriver National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, which in addition to UNICEF provides funding for IPUMS Mix and also to the Minnesota Population Center where we are housed. All right, so let me tell you a little bit about what we're going to share with you today. So the first question that I'll address is, what value does IPUMS add for mixed data users? And then I'll talk about what kind of research is facilitated by IPUMS Mix. I want to talk a little bit about IPUMS' commitment to democratizing research. And then I'll turn it over to Anna, who's going to give you the details of how IPUMS Mix works and talk about how you can get help if you need it, and also our future directions. Okay, so the first question that you might be asking is, what is IPUMS? And IPUMS is survey and census microdata, so it's individual level data. For IPUMS Mix, it's actually not data. Instead, the data are distributed by UNICEF Mix, and IPUMS is providing the syntax, but it works similar to the other IPUMS products, except that you download the data from Mix and then you create the pooled and integrated file on your own computer. The other thing that IPUMS is known for is the harmonization of variables across countries, and I'll show you that in just a moment. We're also known for creating documentation that makes it easier to use the data, so you can understand, for example, which people were asked a particular question or how comparable things are across surveys. And everything about IPUMS, everything on the IPUMS website is entirely free of charge. All right, so let me talk a little bit about the value added by IPUMS. One of the simplest but important things is data discovery. So sometimes when you're conducting research, you're wondering which variables are available in which surveys. And our website helps researchers answer that question. And you can also find other things about the data, like the frequencies for all the variables that are in IPUMS Mix. And as I mentioned, we have comprehensive documentation, and Anna will be showing this to you precisely, but you can see the questionnaire text associated with a variable. You can see the sampling universe for each question and explanations of comparability across samples. But one of the things we're best known for is variable harmonization. And the issue here is that across mixed samples and other survey or census samples, you have very similar variables, but they have different names and labels. And so in IPUMS Mix, the syntax that you'll receive gives all the comparable variables consistent names and labels across all samples. But we've been doing this kind of harmonization at IPUMS for over 30 years now. And so we have a process that allows us to ensure that there's no loss of detail. I want to really briefly show you what this looks like. Okay, so this is household head religion for 3 countries. This is a variable, one variable from 3 surveys: the Central African Republic of 2010, the Thailand sample for 2022, and the Nigeria sample for 2021. What you can, each row, or each column is possible responses for household head religion, which is the variable HC1A, and it happens to have the same name across these three samples. You can see that some of the codes are the same across countries, so 6 is other religion, but that's not true for all countries. So if you pooled the mixed data without IPUMS, one set of variable labels would erase the other 2. So some novice researchers, if they tried to pool this data, would probably end up grouping Muslims, Christians, and those following traditional religions all in the same category. And obviously that would lead to some errors. The Christian category has its own unique harmonization issue because it's a single category in Thailand and Nigeria, but it is 2 categories in the Central African Republic. So here's how the IPUMS harmonization process works. A person will look at the value labels in each column and begin to move them to show the consistent labels on each row. Okay, so what you see here is no religion is all on the first row, and then, for example, Islam is on the same row, and so forth. If you go forward, Anna. All right, so then we provide a value label and a category for each of these categories, and you can see that Christianity currently is taking up 3 rows. So now I want to show you how we deal with that. We put in what we call composite coding. So all of the values in the teens or the tens represent different elements of Christianity. So 11 is Catholic and 12 is Protestant. And I just want to mention here that although we do this kind of harmonization, we're not saying that you necessarily should, for any kind of research purpose, should compare religion across samples. Obviously, what religion means in different regions and different countries can be different, so one wants to be cautious using a harmonized variable. But this is an option, and I have seen some really interesting research that has used religion in important and useful ways. The other thing that we harmonize is geography. So we provide a common footprint across time. So here we can show you some maps of Tanzania. Tanzania in 1996 and Tanzania in 2015 and the regions in the country. And by the way, these are actually from the DHS, but the harmonization process works similarly for IPUMS mix. So around Lake Victoria, the boundaries changed completely between 1996 and 2015. And in 3 other regions, the geographic regions were split over time. So in 1996, they were 1 region, and then in 2015, they became 2 regions. And this is a good point for me to say that we are doing this harmonization for research purposes. Our harmonized geography is not meant to make a statement about any political boundaries within countries, but sometimes researchers want to know that they're studying the same cities, the people located in the same area across time. Okay, so this shows the harmonized variable in IPUMS. The gray, yellow, pink, and green areas now represent 1 single region. So this is a least common denominator approach. And in IPUMS, you'll still get the syntax that will include the regions for 1996 and the regions for 2015, but now you'll have this new integrated variable, and it always has the same type of name, which is geo_country, first year of the harmonization _ last year of the harmonization. And so that's very valuable for studying trends over time. Okay, now let's talk a little bit. I've shown you what what value IPUMS mix adds for researchers. And just to summarize the kinds of value that this adds in terms of research, it allows for comparative research across countries, studying trends over time, pooling data to study small populations such as orphans or children with particular disabilities, or maybe children who are exposed to particular climate events. And if you search Google Scholar for UNICEF mix, you'll return a lot of really important research studies, but almost all of them are going to be studies conducted with a single mix sample, which doesn't allow for this kind of research. A few of those studies, however, will be pooling multiple samples and give you a feel for the kind of research that is now much easier because of IPUMS mix. So I want to just share a few of those studies with you, and I'm going to only give you the most basic summaries here. I encourage you to look up these articles, and we do have references at the end of this presentation. So Turunk et al. Used a sample of families in waves 4, 5, and 6 of mix, and these researchers found that when mothers or fathers see violence against women as justified, this creates a risk factor for child development. And the risk arises because these attitudes are associated with less parental involvement with children. This was a sophisticated statistical approach, and the findings are actually more nuanced than this. So again, I encourage you to look at the article directly. Manu et al. Used 35 mix to assess the association between the availability of children's books within households and the literacy numeracy skills of 3 to 5-year-olds. Meanwhile, Bornstein et al. Used 51 mix to determine the association between country scores on a measure of development, the Human Development Index, which looks at the capability of individuals, and the details of how children within those countries were faring in terms of early childhood development. And Ahisu et al. Used the 3 most recent mix from Lao People's Democratic Republic to study trends over time from 2006 to 2017. So hopefully now you see IPUMS mix's value, and you might understand better how it could help you in your research projects. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is how at IPUMS we are deeply committed to democratizing research access, and that is driving almost everything that we do. We especially want to provide access to research for individuals who may lack resources, such as students or individuals at low resource institutions. So let me give you some examples of information about how we're trying to reach all individuals to help them with their to help them complete research with the mixed data. Meher conducted a training at Dow University of Health Science in Karachi, Pakistan in December. On the left, there's an excerpt of the flyer advertising the event. And then on the right, there's a photo of Meher and many of the participants. In addition to this, Anna led a well-attended webinar introducing IPUMS Mix last month. Attendees hailed from 47 countries, encompassing nearly all regions of the world. Teaching is also an important part of our mission at the University of Minnesota, and we take our obligation to train students to do quality research very seriously. So, for example, Professor Catherine Grace and I teach a course for graduate students and advanced undergraduates on global household survey analysis. And the students' final projects are research posters. And so this shows an event that we have at the end of the year where the students present their research posters. The parents are invited, and the students have little speeches that they've prepared to explain their work. And it's very, very exciting to see them being able to produce small research projects on their own. And the evidence suggests that we are, in fact, reaching people, although we're never resting on our laurels, we're never satisfied, we're always trying to reach more people. So IPUMS Global Health, which includes IPUMS Mix, IPUMS DHS, and IPUMS PMA, has attracted users from all over the world. We currently have over 7,500 registered users from 115 countries. And we have users from a broad range of disciplines, including economics, environmental science, sociology, operational sciences. We're very proud of the fact that 31% of our users are students, and those students are making good use of the IPUMS Global Health products, because dozens of students have used IPUMS Global Health for their honors theses for undergraduates, and then master's theses and PhD dissertations. And those are students from all over the world. The last thing I wanted to mention before I hand it over to Anna is just if we can ask you, if you use the IPUMS website or if you use our syntax to harmonize mixed data, please, please, please cite us, because that helps us show to NICHD that people are interested in this data and this syntax, and it helps us with our continued funding. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Anna.
Thanks, Liz. So I'm going to walk through an overview of the IPUMS Mix user interface and web system where you can create a custom extract. I'll also show some different resources for additional guidance and additional help, and some of the exciting future directions at IPUMS Mix. Currently in IPUMS Mix, we include harmonization for over 900 variables. And as Attila said in the beginning, much of this harmonization was done in partnership for the Mix tabulator. We aim to finish harmonization for all common variables, most common in round 6, shortly, and we will continue to add harmonization for newly released samples and newly released variables going forward. Currently, in IPUMS Mix, we have included harmonization for all publicly available samples in round 3, 4, 5, and 6. This is the IPUMS Mix webpage, and the website can be found at the bottom corner, mix.ipums.org. I'll be referring back to this homepage several times as I orient you through the different features. The first thing that a user would have to do when they first get to the IPUMS Mix webpage is to log in. And users log in with the UNICEF Mix credentials. UNICEF Mix is the authorizing agency behind UNICEF Mix and IPUMS Mix. So users cannot use IPUMS Mix without first being approved by UNICEF. If a user has not already created a UNICEF Mix account, they will be prompted to create an account either through registering at this link down here or by clicking register up here, and they will be directed to register with UNICEF. Going back to the homepage, the next thing I want to show is our documentation and user guides, which can be found here. We provide a variety of different types of user guides, including walkthroughs and different data and documentation, metadata and documentation about the samples, the questionnaires, and different uses of IPUMS Mix. I also want to highlight where the geography and the spatially harmonized geographic files can be found. Once again, these are produced by IPUMS Mix and are not intended for any political use or geographic calculations. They're for reference purposes only and research purposes only. Returning back to the home page once again, I will next describe the process of creating a custom dataset. This is most easily found by clicking here, Get Data. The first decision that a user would have to make when navigating the IPUMS Mix user interface is which unit of analysis they would like to browse when selecting both samples and variable harmonization. These different units of analysis match on to the different data files that UNICEF Mix produces, including women, children 0 to 4, children 5 to 17, births, men, household members, and household characteristics. For this particular example, I'll walk through the harmonization and samples available at the Children 0 to 4 unit of analysis. This is the variable browsing screen, and you can see at the top that we are currently browsing the Children 0 to 4 unit of analysis. But if I wanted to change to browse the harmonization available for another unit of analysis, I can click here and make a different selection. The first thing that I will do is select samples. Which samples in the Child 0 to 4 unit of analysis am I interested in browsing? This is the sample selection page. As you can see, there are a list of countries and rounds with years. Users can select all samples within a particular country, all samples within a particular round, or individual samples, which are country year, specific to a country year combination. Each of these different years is actually a hyperlink, and additional information can be accessed by clicking on the year or learning more about a particular sample by clicking on one of these purple icons. If I'm satisfied with the samples that I've selected, I click Submit Sample Selection in this purple button at the top. Going back to the browsing menu, you can now see a data cart has appeared at the top. And in my data cart, I've selected 16 samples. The data cart operates very similar to an online shopping cart, except in this case, everything is free. You can add samples and you can add variables into your data cart before checking out and creating an extract. So now that I've selected samples, the next thing I'll do is browse the variables. One way to do this is by using this search feature here, which I won't demonstrate today, but it operates very much like any other search feature where you type in some keywords and get results based on keywords. The more common method of browsing variables is by using these drop-down menus. These drop-down menus group variables based on different topics or modules, and many of them match on to the modules found in UNICEF Mix. Again, the variables that you can find here are related only to the Children 0 to 4 unit of analysis. Topics found on other units of analysis would only be available if you were currently browsing a different unit. So for this example, I will walk through some variables in the early childhood development topic group. This page shows the different variables available in the early childhood development topic group. Here you can see a list of harmonized variable names and an associated variable label that gives a brief summary of the different harmonized variables. You can also see a list of all of the samples out to the side, where an X indicates that that particular harmonized variable is available for that particular sample. I will then click here on the harmonized variable ECE attend, which describes if the child is attending early childhood education. These different variable names are hyperlinks, which will bring you to more information and documentation about each of the harmonized variables. This page shows the metadata and documentation for the harmonized variable ECE attend. There are several tabs across the top of this page that read codes, description, comparability, universe, availability, and questionnaire text. And I will walk through each of these tabs one by one. This first page, codes, describes the details of the harmonized variable ECE attends and the different codes that would be present in a statistical package. You can see the different codes and labels down at the bottom, where 0 represents no, 1 represents yes, 7 represents don't know, 8 represents missing, and 9 represents not in universe. You can also see a more nuanced list of the samples available. And in this case, the X's represent which codes are available in which samples. One feature that I won't demonstrate today is the case count view, where if you toggle this button to the case count view option, instead of reading X's, at each of the code labels, the actual frequencies would be tabulated. This next tab, description, represents a brief summary of the harmonized variable ECE attend. This gives a broad overview of what this harmonized variable means across all samples. In this case, ECE attend reports if the child attends any organized learning or early childhood education program, such as a private or government facility, including kindergarten or community childcare. This next tab, comparability, offers details and summaries of any possible changes across samples or years or rounds that would be particularly important for a user to know about if they were considering pooling across time or place. For example, the comparability section for this variable, ECE attend, notes that most samples, for most surveys, data pertain to children 3 to 4 years old, but some surveys apply a different age universe. And at the bottom of this page, you can note that specifically Argentina 2011 includes all children 0 to 4 in the universe. And this would be an important detail to note if you were conducting research that included Argentina 2011 and other samples that had a different universe. We also, in the comparability section, document different harmonization decisions that we have made at IPUMS. For example, in this particular harmonized variable, ECE attend, we have included round 6 samples that are differently harmonized in a variable ECE current, which reports if the child is currently attending an early childhood education facility. Now, the nuanced wording between if a child is attending an early childhood education program and the slight change in round 6 to emphasize if a child is currently attending an early childhood education is an important distinction. However, because these two variables are related, we have chosen to include the round 6 samples in the variable ECE attend through some additional programming. That decision is documented here so that researchers can decide for themselves if that decision is in line with what their research goals are. This next tab documents the universe for each particular sample. And you can see here that while most samples represent children 0 to 3, Argentina 2011 does represent children 0 to 4. So this is just drawing your attention to an important detail in the universe for this particular variable. The next tab reports the availability of this variable, ECE attend, across all samples. This can be particularly useful in data discovery if you have only selected a small number of samples, but are curious to know for which other samples this harmonized variable ECE attend may be available for. And finally, this tab, questionnaire text, reports the exact question wording found in each sample for the variable included in the harmonization. So here is an example of the questionnaire wording for the Afghanistan 2010 sample. And I also want to point out that in addition to the text for a particular variable, we also provide links to the text of the entire document and a link to the original PDF that would include original language. In IPUMS, we do translate everything into English per the guidance of our funders, the NICHD at the US. I'll show next a quick example of how the questionnaire text tab might be useful in making decisions about harmonization in particular research questions. This example shows the questionnaire text from 2 different Afghanistan samples, Afghanistan 2010 and 2022. And you can see here that the questionnaire text is representing a different variable name, yet both of these variables have been harmonized to be included in the variable ECE attends. After I've looked through all the documentation and all the metadata, and I feel confident that this variable ECE attend is something that I want to include in my custom data extract, I can click Add to Cart here. And now in this data cart, I show that I've selected one variable and 16 samples. If I'm satisfied with the selection, I next click View Cart. And this brings me to a summary of the data cart that I've created currently. At this point, I can go back and add more variables, add more samples. And just to read this summary a little more clearly, I can see here the samples that I have selected. And down here at the bottom, you can see the variable ECE attend has been selected in the data cart. There are also other variables included in the data cart, and these represent specific sample identifiers, person identifiers, and weight variables that are common and helpful for most different types of analysis that we automatically add into each custom data extract. If I'm satisfied with all of the variables and samples, I can click and create an extract request. At this point, there's an opportunity to describe a particular extract, and this is highly recommended as it can sometimes be confusing to determine which data extract is associated with which data file. At this point, if a user, At this point, if a user has not logged in, they will be required to log in before proceeding any further. Again, this is logging in with UNICEF mixed credentials and being authorized by UNICEF. I next click this purple button that reads Submit Extract. And I'll take a moment here to pause and emphasize that IPUMS Mix does not disseminate mixed data. Instead, we are providing custom syntax files that can be run in Stata. And I'll next demonstrate how that process works. So when a user clicks Submit Extract, they will be taken to a download or extract page. And on this page, I will note several features. First, there are excellent help resources located here. This will bring you back into those user guides so that additional information can be found. And I also want to highlight this revision tab that allows you to revise a previously created extract instead of having to start over completely. When a download is finished, a green button here will read Download from UNICEF. Upon clicking this, text appears that says you are being directed to UNICEF to download your custom data extract. The data from UNICEF are paired with IPUMS generated Stata syntax. Unzip the download packet on your computer and run the syntax file to complete your extract. When clicking this purple button, Continue to Download, you are directed to UNICEF to download your data. Downloading the data from UNICEF is as simple as clicking this blue button. When downloading the data, a file with 3 different elements will be downloaded. There's a file for data, a file for syntax, and a do file, which is a Stata-specific syntax file. And this do file will run all of the harmonization on your computer. So by clicking this do file to open it, this is what a typical do file looks like in Stata. And all a user needs to do is click this button here, which will run the file. And that is the only step necessary. All of the running will happen automatically and in the background. When the file is run, in Stata, you will have a single data file that represents all of the samples and all of the variables that you identified in your custom data extract. And I want to note over here that this only took 4 steps. The first to open the file, the second to run the file, and I immediately was able to start running cross tabulations of the different samples and variables in the extract, including that first tabulation, which represents ECE attend for different samples. If you aren't a Stata user at this point, you can save the harmonized data file and then export it into a statistical software that you would be more comfortable in, such as SPSS, R, SAS, or any other program. We have a lot of resources at IPUMS Mix that can help with this process, including those user guides that I mentioned earlier. There's an IPUMS blog that has additional details and information about the IPUMS Mix. IPUMS also has a YouTube channel, which is common across all of the different IPUMS projects that Liz mentioned earlier, but also has great resources to help IPUMS Mix users. And finally, I want to highlight the IPUMS user forum that is a great place to ask questions and get questions answered by other users and by knowledgeable IPUMS staff. This user forum is monitored all the time by IPUMS staff, and it can be an excellent place to get a really quick answer to your questions. As I mentioned, in IPUMS Mix, we currently have harmonization for over 900 variables, and this includes almost 89 countries, 211 samples, and over 1,000 different data sets. In January, we released several new harmonization for several new variables and harmonization for several new samples. And the new variables included child labor, alcohol and tobacco use, victimization, household energy use, and household assets. And the new samples that were included in the January release included the countries of Afghanistan, Fiji, Vietnam, Nigeria, Uzbekistan, Thailand, and Pakistan. We aim to release more harmonization for variables and samples in the early summer. We are also continuing our outreach efforts through various conference workshops and webinars. These are a selection of the conferences that we will be attending this spring. We are also working to further the mission of democratizing data by producing different resources for users, including video tutorials, different data exercises that can be used either to get comfortable with the IPUMS Mix website or are great resources for teaching. We're also working to develop several user notes, particularly with code examples, to help users who aren't as familiar in Stata access and work with the data extracts that they've created. And with that, I will conclude by reinforcing that our website is mix.ipums.org, and any questions that aren't answered in this webinar today can be directed at our user support team, ipums@umn.edu. And with that, I conclude, and we'll open the floor up for any questions or any other things that we can talk about today.
Thank you so much. Excellent. Thank you very much, Liz. Thanks, Anna. This was very good, very informative as well. I think before saying anything else, I would like to recommend all the mixed users, mixed data users, all analysts, academics, student friends, everyone to go to the IPUMS Mix site and start using it. Start practicing it. I think it will need some practice, but once you have done the initial practice, it becomes very easy, I would think. So that is really important to do at this point. Now, I think I will give the floor to Archana to tell us about the chat and the Q&A. Archana?
Thank you, Attila. So the Q&A is now open, so please add your questions there, and then we can direct them to our presenters. Everyone should be able to pose their questions in there, and we can then start the discussion around those.
Thank you very much, Archana. We have had in the first webinar some technical challenges. Because of that, we didn't open the chat and the Q&A at the beginning of this session. But I see now one question. I was wondering how IPUMS is updated if a new mix is published. Are all the variables revised to harmonize with other existing surveys? Could that lead to splitting or merging information in two variables when previously they were not? Is the question. Somewhat related, maybe I can complement the question a little bit and ask, you have IPUMS DHS as well, and you are doing harmonization work with DHS, although the way that it works is a little bit different between IPUMS Mix and DHS. But are these two survey programs and the other survey program that you have on IPUMS as well, are they completely harmonized across each other, or are they only harmonized within the survey program? And if not, is there any facility to for the users or in the guidance for the users to make them harmonized on their own computers, for instance?
Great questions. Okay. So the first part about new samples, there is a delay from when a sample becomes publicly available at the UNICEF Mix website and for when it would become available at IPUMS Mix. And this is because of the time it would take to create the harmonization syntax and process a variable. We're hoping to reduce that time to just several months. But at this point, there is a delay for including harmonization of new samples. At this point, we do not include harmonization for all variables within a sample. We have very limited modules across the different units of analysis. We are hoping to get to 100% of the variables shortly, but currently it's not all variables. So that would be new samples would also only have a subset of the variables included in them, included in the harmonization. The question about if a new sample comes in and has a different variable, if a variable from a new sample is comparable and harmonizable with an existing harmonized variable, it's included in that harmonized variable. With the appropriate checks to confirm that the questionnaire wording is comparable, the universe is comparable, and there's no other changes that would make it incomparable. If a situation were to come up where a particular sample was not comparable with an existing harmonized variable, there are several different things that we would do, including create a new harmonized variable that represented that change, or modifying the existing variable's code structure to accommodate any new information. And we would make a note of that as in the revision before we would release that new sample. And I think the final aspect that we're very aware of, that the transition to the Mix 7 surveys is very exciting, and we're looking forward to seeing how the Mix 7 questionnaires and modules fit into the harmonized variables that we currently have, and what new harmonization we will be working on to accommodate the Mix 7 samples. So we are, it's a little bit of a mix on whether or not something is included into something that we've created already, harmonization we've created already, or requires a difference in a distinction. The question about harmonization and comparability across different IPUMS global health projects. As Dr. Boyle mentioned earlier, there are 3 projects that are associated with the IPUMS global health umbrella: IPUMS Mix, IPUMS DHS, and IPUMS PMA. Currently, those 3 projects are entirely standalone projects. Variables within IPUMS Mix are only harmonized and comparable within IPUMS Mix. And facilitating analysis across the projects at this point is not a feature that we're supporting. However, as most people are familiar with the DHS questionnaires and the mixed questionnaires know, there's a lot of similarities that can broaden research questions because of the shared, sometimes shared commonalities across those two projects. We are working on several endeavors to assist users who are interested in looking at mixed data and DHS data together. However, due to some foundational sample design differences, there's a lot of caution around pooling things without thinking it through. So what we're trying to do right now is to identify commonalities and work on making those commonalities easier, while also providing, including providing code, drawing your attention to different variable names for harmonized variables. However, with the distinctions between DHS data and mixed data, we are also trying to inform users that it is not possible to just pool without thinking critically about the sampling design, the inclusion of variables in the structure. So I believe the answer to that question is yes, we are working on efforts to be able to think about data across IPUMS DHS and IPUMS Mix. However, there are just really unique features about each of those projects that are require some very careful consideration.
Thank you very much, Anna. There's a couple of questions and requests that are coming up repeatedly, I think, from the users. And fortunately, we do have time. So may I ask you kindly to once again explain how users can access the access. You mentioned that the data is downloaded from UNICEF and you have to have an account. You have to be registered with the Mix program, etc. And then you can actually work on IPUMS Mix. But can you explain that further once again, Anna, maybe, because that's the start of all use, right? So that would be good. And secondly, there's questions coming regarding SPSS, Stata, etc. You gave an example with a Stata file in it, but is this all possible with SPSS? I think we have some SPSS users who are very interested. And there was one question even about having a Stata license. Of course, licenses are a different thing. This is not to do with IPUMS or the Mix program. Licenses of Stata or SPSS is about the users themselves. So that's obvious. But in terms of access and in terms of SPSS Stata, can you please once again explain these very quickly? Thank you.
Yes, sounds good. I'm going to start with the SPSS question, and then I will go back into the access question. As demonstrated, currently IPUMS Mix is only available if you have access in some capacity to Stata. We have the syntax that we've created must be run in Stata in order to create a harmonized data file. We are hoping to expand this into SPSS in the coming year, but currently, at least to create the harmonized data file, you must at least have access to Stata to run the do file. And at that point, saving the data file and exporting it into SPSS is a fairly simple process, and the data can be moved into SPSS and analysis can happen in SPSS. We recognize that this is a limiting factor, as Stata, a license for Stata can be very expensive and can be a barrier for many people who don't have a university access or some other way of accessing it. And we recognize this and are looking to improve this feature in the coming year. The question about access. So I'm happy to sort of walk through the process again, but at a very high level, if you have an account with UNICEF Mix, you can access IPUMS Mix completely seamlessly. It's the same credentials, it's the same account. So when you are logging into IPUMS Mix, the email and password that you have used to register for Mix would be the same email and password to be used at IPUMS Mix. If you don't have authorization to access the UNICEF Mix data, the registration process is featured on the IPUMS Mix website and also the UNICEF Mix website. And approval can take 1 to 3 business days. You can browse all of the documentation, the tutorials, the samples, and the metadata that I walked through in the example, including the codes, the descriptions, the questionnaire text, the comparability, and the universes. You don't have to be logged in order to see all of those different metadata documentations. It's only at the step in which you want to create a custom data extract that you would have to be logged in. So you would not be allowed to create a data extract or download data without being authorized to do so. But the rest of the process is available to browse, to engage in data discovery, and to learn more about the harmonized variables and the original source variables. So I hope that answers the question about access.
Thank you very much, Anna. Several more questions have come in. I've been trying to group them while I listen to you with a lot of interest. But before I forward to you I direct any questions to you, there was a question about this webinar, whether it will be made available. Yes, on the Mix YouTube channel. If you are not a UNICEF staff member, then you will be able to access this webinar on the Mix YouTube channel. If you are UNICEF, then we have the data collection guidance SharePoint site. You can access this there. There was a question. You showed an example about religion, how a variable on religion is harmonized, but there's a question on how ethnicity is harmonized, given that, of course, in terms of ethnicity, there are many more categories across countries. Can you please explain that a little bit, Anna, how you tackle that kind of variable, which is completely different almost from one country to the other sometimes?
Yes, exactly. And we at IPUMS harmonize separately by country. There are so many different categories and nuances about what types of ethnicities are collected that we are not pooling across all countries, but instead have decided to make separate ethnicity variables for every country. So, for example, Nigeria ethnicity would, all Nigerian samples would be included, but it would only include that particular country. So that's something that we do pay attention to, is if it is not possible to create harmonization for every variable, given some things are just incredibly specific, and ethnicity is a really great example of that type of variable, or variables in that case, as there would be one for every country.
Yeah. Thanks, Anna. Are you using any deep learning or machine learning in this process, in the harmonization process?
We are not. We are making each of these decisions across our team, looking at questionnaire texts, utilizing the commonalities that the data does have. I do not know what the future of machine learning looks like more broadly. It is something that at IPUMS, we have a dedicated IT staff, and they are more knowledgeable about what that future looks like. But at this point, every decision made about the comparability and harmonization of a variable is made by a researcher and verified by other researchers.
Thank you. There's a question about how much DHS and mix are consistent. In fact, there's a few questions which relate to the mix program, not only to IPUMS mix. So yes, there's some overlap between the DHS and the mix programs, but as colleagues have explained, there's separate harmonization of those two programs right now. But I should only point out maybe that at present, our estimate is that a typical or the standard questionnaires of mix are not fully equal to a DHS standard questionnaire. In fact, that proportion is going down. I think about 60%. There's a 60%, 50 to 60% overlap as of today between the standard DHS questionnaires and the mix questionnaires. There was another question about an option to combine the 0 to 4 units and the 5 to 17 units. Would there be any, is this possible? How can it be done as well? Do you want to say something about this from the IPUMS mix point of view? And then I can come in maybe from a methodology of data collection point of view and explain it further.
Sounds good. Yeah, I can say that given the specifics of the harmonization syntax process, data from each unit of analysis needs to be created, browsed, and downloaded separately. So in that case, if a user was interested in studying 0 to 4-year-olds, that would be considered one data extract, and a separate data extract would be created for the 5 to 17-year-olds. Given the relationships across the different data files, including household and person identifiers, it is possible to do some really complex and interesting linking across the data files. For example, linking children into the household, linking children to mothers and guardians or biological parents. This all has to happen on a user's computer. We do provide guidance on pointing out different linking keys and characters and variable names, and we test these processes. But given the nature of the system, we cannot do that linking for the users. And in fact, there are so many different combinations that it would be more limiting for us to do so extensively. So we instead provide guidance on how one would go about downloading separate data files, and then some guidance on how to link those for a particular research question on their own computer. The data files would be harmonized, and so you would be able to link multiple samples of 0 to 4-year-olds and multiple samples of 5 to 17-year-olds at one time. But that all has to happen after the extract is created and after the harmonized data files and the stata do files are run.
Hey, Anna, I might jump in here to remind or let folks know that you are holding a webinar this spring on precisely this issue of linking across files and how users can do that appropriately.
Yes, thank you, Liz. That would probably be a good moment for me to mention that we are very interested in facilitating this and making it as easy as possible. And at IPUMS, we're hoping to do, we're planning a webinar on this particular topic later in the summer.
Great, thank you so much. Linking data sets is in fact a challenge for some users. So any kind of guidance that comes from you or us is always useful to researchers, I would think. But another aspect of it, if you were to create, if a user was to create a a single data set, not linking by adding the 0 to 4 and to 5 to 17 data sets, that's another issue. Because this is very methodologically and nerdy issue, but for users who know surveys, these data sets are separately normalized. Their sample weights are separately normalized. So there are some challenges in terms of adding these data to each other and coming up with a 0 to 17 children's data, although the targeted respondents to these questionnaires are both, in the case of both questionnaires, are mothers or caregivers of children. More questions coming in. One colleague is saying that data on refugees or refugee camps was not available in previous surveys and makes in some surveys this is available. Is there any guidance coming from you on this, where they can find this information, where they cannot find this information?
The data or the harmonization of IPUMS mix comes from the publicly available mix files. So we don't have access to any secret or hidden or additional information. It's so information that would be available in the original data files is what would be available at IPUMS. In the samples that we've worked with and we've harmonized, the best indicator of refugee status would be in the urban-rural areas, though I do believe that there are some variables that we have not yet harmonized that would be more indicators. So I don't believe that's a satisfactory answer to your question in terms of being able to specifically identify a population such as refugees. But we, in the case where identifiers would be called different things in different samples, that would be something that we would harmonize together. I can't off the top of my head recall a particular variable or a particular code at this point, but that would be something that I can follow up with if a user is interested.
Yeah, whether refugee camps or the populations in refugee camps or IDPs for that matter are included in the survey is a survey specific question rather than harmonization question. The target, the objective of the IPUMS program, as well as us, our collaboration, is to ultimately find ourselves in a position where we have harmonized all the publicly available mixed data, all the variables, all the countries, all the surveys. And in that case, some countries will have segments of their data that relate to the refugee camps or the IDPs. There was a question about if we have IPUMS mix, what happens to the original mix data? Well, the original mix data is still going to be there. The IPUMS mix data that you create on your computer, if you're a user, then it's a harmonized data, but the original data will always be there, as well as all the original documentation, the reports, and everything else that goes with each of those surveys. So we are not looking at a replacement, but we are looking at an improved user experience through IPUMS mix. That's what's happening. There's a couple of questions about content. Let me answer those very quickly, if you don't mind, Anna and Liz.
Mm-hmm.
One is, why do we have 5 to 17 questionnaire available onwards from Mix 6? Why wasn't it available? It's because of the indicators, because of the way that we work. The 5 to 17 questionnaire was introduced in the 6th round of Mix. Some of the content of the 5 to 17 questionnaire used to be in the household questionnaire or the women's questionnaire before. We introduced it because there were some new indicators which were introduced to the program, and the best methodological way to capture those indicators was through a dedicated 5 to 17 questionnaire, and that's when it was introduced. There was also a question on whether there's climate change data in the mix. Yes, there are some data. For instance, if I was to give some example about environment, not climate change necessarily, but environment in general, we are now including in several surveys something on blood lead level testing. There's the water and sanitation, very much environment related questions that we ask. There's energy questions that we have in the mix, and many of them are all already harmonized in the IPUMS mix. So there will be much more to come, of course, in the immediate future. Let's look at other questions. Maybe one question from my side, coming from a user who wasn't able to attend. It sometimes, very rarely though, we do make some changes on the publicly available datasets on the MIX website. For instance, a sample weight might change, or the code of something could change because we may have spotted afterwards, in many cases, thanks to our users, that something is not right. And although this rarely happens, it does happen sometimes, both with the MIX or the DHS program or other survey programs. How would IPUMS deal with this change?
Yeah, great question. We would redo the harmonization for a particular sample or a particular variable within a sample once that change or update was made available. Again, there would be a bit of a delay between when a publicly available sample was available at MIX and by the time it gets into IPUMS. So that change might take a little bit of time to get reflected. In the meantime, we could remove that sample from availability if it was something that was really egregious. If there is a change that reflected the values of data or the harmonization that was being produced with IPUMS, we would make a note of that to the IPUMS users also through a revisions documentation to point out that sample weights or something like that had changed and that previous analyses done with those variables for that particular sample would need to be revisited. A particular change in codes would be included in the new harmonization syntax and sort of processed through. I will also say that we are responsive and receptive to different types of error catching at IPUMS MIX. We work very hard to verify all of the materials that we make public. However, rarely there are things that we would hear from users, and so we do welcome feedback on the documentation, on the harmonization available, and we would seek to make any changes necessary as quickly as possible to make sure that the documentation and the harmonization is as accurate as possible.
If I could add one other point, just wanted to mention that IPUMS MIX also follows the DOI archive system. So if one wants to recreate their research with the data that was previously available, the DOI system will allow them to go in and get access to the data that they originally used, which sometimes is important, for replicability purposes.
Thanks, Liz. A question again from colleagues. You mentioned that there's 89 surveys which have been harmonized in IPUMS MIX. The question is, how many do you have for the DHS program? Are they the same countries or different countries? And also, I want to complement this question by asking something else, which the answer I know, but it would be in the best interest of the participants. The way that you are harmonizing in the DHS program and the MIX program. With the MIX program, you're going variable by variable for many surveys. Have you been doing the same in the DHS with respect to the DHS program, or is it different?
Great questions. In IPUMS DHS, and perhaps Liz, you can correct me if I'm wrong, we include 44 countries, predominantly in Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and the Middle East. So we do, in IPUMS DHS, we do not include all regions of the world at this point. There are countries that overlap in both IPUMS DHS and IPUMS Mix. Then there are unique countries in each of those data collections or data projects also. In IPUMS DHS, the format that was followed was to harmonize every variable from a particular survey. And this results in over 20,000 harmonized variables. There's a lot included in IPUMS DHS. As Attila notes, the approach we took at IPUMS Mix was a little different, where instead of going very deep into a particular country or a particular sample, we instead chose to create harmonization for all available samples, but not necessarily 100% of the variables available. We are working towards 100%, but we decided to start with select variables in harmonization. And this was partially due to the production of the Mix tabulator, and also from demand from users wanting to look more broadly across samples, but maybe being okay with being limited in the number of variables in the depth. So the two projects have a bit of a different approach. As mentioned earlier, they are completely separate harmonization processes. And there are some countries or particular questions that are in common, but there's also a lot of uniqueness across DHS data and Mix data, and IPUMS DHS and IPUMS Mix.
Thank you very much, Anna. How do you deal with country names? Sometimes this is a very tricky question. For instance, I can give an example of a country which did a survey some years ago, and since then, the country there has been changes. The country has been divided into two separate countries. When I go to IPUMS or Mix, do I find the name of the previous country, or do I find two separate files for those two newly formed countries?
We try to follow the guidance that UNICEF presents in both file names of currently available countries, but also previously available countries. And this is something that we're trying to follow the guidance of the documentation, the reports, and the sample names presented by UNICEF.
Thank you very much indeed. It's the UN approved names, of course. As UNICEF, we try to be consistent with those as much as possible. We are just 10 minutes away from 12:30, so I will give it over to Archana. But thank you so much, Liz and Anna. This has been really great. Comments are coming in from our colleagues that this has been very informative, educative as well. So thank you very much. There was one question that I cannot resist the temptation of not answering. I need to answer the question. Why were some countries present in Mix 1 and Mix 2, but not later, or vice versa? It's just because the Mix program is an on-demand basis program. So countries, if they feel the need that they said they have data gaps, and a Mix is going to be filling that data gap, and depending on the context, depending on the presence of other data sets, etc., there are many factors. Countries might join in, but there's no such thing as a country which does Mix all the time, or which never does a Mix survey. So it's a completely on-demand basis. So we try to support all countries that reach out to us for conducting a Mix survey. So once again, thank you so much, Liz and Anna, and I hand over to Archana.
Thank you, Attila. I'd like to add my thanks to Anna and Liz and Mare for joining us today for the excellent presentation. And thank you all of you for participating and for the great questions and comments. I'd like to remind you that the next webinar will be taking place in 2 weeks on March 6th, and it's entitled, How Good Are Response Rates in Mainstream Household Survey Programs? A retrospective analysis of mixed and DHS surveys since the 1990s. I think it complements this particular session quite well. So we hope to see you then. Again, a reminder that the recording of this is available on the Mix YouTube channel. It'll be up there shortly. So please do take a look there, as well as for our UNICEF colleagues, it'll be available on our SharePoint site as well. So thank you again, everyone, for your participation, and we look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.